Marcus Aurelius once reminded us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you want most people to find you irresistible, then dye your thoughts with self-respect, confidence, and healthy boundaries. Stay with me until the very end of this video. I'll show you 7 rules, drawn from both Stoic wisdom and modern psychology, that will magnetize almost everyone to you. If you find these insights valuable, remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share your own story below. Now, let's dive straight into these 7 rules that can change the way others perceive and value you. Chapter 1. Stop giving your attention away freely. The ancient Stoics firmly believed that our attention is one of our most valuable assets, something Epictetus often implied when discussing the discipline of the mind. In today's hyper-connected world, attention has become a currency, and ironically, most of us hand it out like spare change. When you give your focus to every new message, every fleeting notification, or every person who glances your way, you inadvertently cheapen your own worth. Imagine for a moment you had a chest filled with gold coins. Would you freely give them to anyone who passes by, or would you make sure only those who truly appreciate and deserve them can receive even a coin? Every time you respond to a late-night text the moment it arrives, or drop all your personal tasks because someone demands your presence, you are telling them, consciously or subconsciously, that your time is less valuable than theirs. The result is predictable. They begin to see you as a convenience, a resource they can tap into whenever they please, instead of a person with their own priorities and ambitions. Stoic philosophy reminds us to understand what lies within our control and to protect that fiercely. Your attention is absolutely within your control, and it shapes not just how you see the world, but also how the world sees you. To cultivate this, start by examining your daily habits. How many times do you check your phone for trivial updates? How quickly do you respond to messages that aren't urgent? How much time do you spend mentally replaying a conversation someone else initiated, giving them free mental real estate in your mind? A Stoic approach would be to practice mindful detachment. This isn't indifference, it's the ability to step back and gauge whether the external stimulus truly deserves your time and energy. If you can learn to pause, take a breath, weigh its importance, then decide to respond on your terms, others will begin to notice your self-control and restraint. This is attractive because it demonstrates self-respect. The power of attention also lies in its scarcity. People want what is rare. One reason precious metals like gold and platinum have high value is because they are not abundant. The same principle applies to your presence. If you are perpetually reachable at the snap of a finger, you eliminate any sense of exclusivity. People tend to appreciate more the things they can't always have. In relationships, friendships, or even professional settings, making others earn your attention fosters deeper respect. It's not about playing mind games or intentionally withholding affection. It's about recognizing that you have finite time on this earth and not everyone merits a piece of it. The process can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to being the always-there person. You might worry that others will think you're distant or uncaring. Stoicism would counter that fear by reminding you that your main concern should be living virtuously, acting in alignment with your values, rather than living to please. By prioritizing your personal growth, mental well-being, and daily responsibilities, you essentially become more selective about whom and what you allow into your sphere of focus. In turn, people come to appreciate that when you do grant your attention, it is meaningful and authentic. One practical technique to achieve this is to create small attention budgets. Allocate certain times of day to respond to personal messages or social media, and stick to that schedule. During work or personal reflection, silence your notifications. This boundary sends a clear message: my time is important. I decide when to engage. Over time, others will adapt. They will text or call expecting that you might not respond immediately, cultivating in them a sense that they must be thoughtful in how they communicate with you. When you do give someone your attention, Make it count. Be fully present. Look them in the eye, listen carefully, and respond thoughtfully. This intensity of presence is another side of the Stoic coin. You control when and how you engage, but when you do, you go all in. People will sense that contrast. When they have your focus, it's 100%. When they don't, you're not easily swayed. This duality of being sometimes reserved and other times profoundly engaged naturally captivates people. They'll sense that your time is precious, your conversation measured, your presence genuine. It's a stark difference from the constant hum of superficial availability, where people respond reflexively, but often without sincerity. By stepping away from that trap, you become a source of intrigue. Others will begin to see that to have your undivided attention is a privilege, not a right. In essence, giving attention sparingly is one of the highest forms of self-respect. The Stoics repeatedly taught that you should never hand over control of your mind to external circumstances or other people. Retaining mastery of your attention is precisely that. It's staying in command of your own destiny, choosing deliberately where you invest your time and energy. You'll discover that as you practice this self-command, people gravitate toward you more. They see your independence and self-assuredness shining through. Rather than being perceived as aloof, you will be seen as discerning, and that aura often leads people to fall in love with your presence and the peace you radiate. So, give yourself permission to set firmer boundaries around your attention. Reflect on how valuable it truly is. Even more, realize that if 99% of people are going to find themselves drawn to you, it will be because you've recognized your own worth first. Once you set this tone, every interaction deepens in quality. You train others to approach you with respect, and your relationships, romantic or otherwise, become more balanced. Your attention is an asset. Invest it wisely. Chapter 2. Stop investing too much effort. The idea of balanced effort in relationships resonates with the Stoic principle of moderation, urging us to find a healthy middle ground instead of leaning into extremes. Seneca wrote about the importance of balance in all aspects of life, cautioning that excess leads to discontent. Nowhere is this more relevant than in our personal connections, be they romantic or platonic, where an imbalance in how much we give can undermine the very bonds we try so hard to strengthen. Often, we assume that the more we pour into a relationship, the more likely we are to be valued. Generosity is indeed a virtue, but if taken too far, it can make the other person complacent and lead you to feel drained. When you repeatedly plan outings, send thoughtful messages, and handle the emotional labor without equivalent effort coming from the other side, you communicate, consciously or not, that the other person barely needs to try. They may begin to view your constant investment as the norm, something they no longer need to value or even acknowledge. By taking on all the heavy lifting, you unintentionally rob them of the opportunity to contribute, to show concern, or to demonstrate their own brand of generosity. Ironically, people value and respect what they have to work for. Giving endlessly without requiring any reciprocity dilutes your worth in their eyes, reducing genuine appreciation. From a Stoic perspective, it's essential to examine your own motives for investing so heavily. Why do you feel compelled to give so much of your time, energy, or resources? Are you seeking validation or approval that you believe only comes from self-sacrifice? Epictetus would remind us that our sense of worth should stem from inner virtue rather than external affirmation. If you're constantly sacrificing your needs to gain someone else's acknowledgement, you're tethering your happiness to a response you can't fully control. In other words, you place your emotional well-being in someone else's hands, a precarious position that leaves you open to disappointment and burnout. The key isn't to swing to the opposite extreme by becoming cold or withholding affection. Stoicism, contrary to popular misconception, does not advocate emotional numbness. Instead, it encourages prudence, reminding us that kindness must be measured and thoughtful. Give what you can wholeheartedly, but pay attention to the balance of effort. If you see that your energetic or emotional contributions are rarely reciprocated, that's a strong indicator that something's off. Relationships, much like muscles, strengthen through mutual exertion. If you're the only one flexing, the connection atrophies into one-sidedness. A practical way to diagnose this imbalance is to perform a small experiment, scale back your efforts just a little and see what happens. Do they notice your reduced involvement and step forward to compensate, or do they ignore the gap and assume you'll eventually fill it again? If they respond by initiating plans or checking in on your well-being, it's a telling sign they genuinely value you. On the other hand, if your decreased effort triggers complaints or reveals indifference, that's a red flag suggesting their interest may revolve primarily around what they can extract from you. Cutting back your effort can be deeply uncomfortable if you've long tied your identity to being the giver. Stepping away from the comfort zone of overinvesting forces you to confront anxiety. Will they still like me if I don't do everything for them? Will I risk losing the relationship? Stoic philosophy reminds us, however, that discomfort can be a powerful teacher. Growth typically comes from facing and managing these internal fears, which in turn strengthens self-reliance. You discover that you can maintain healthy connections without sacrificing your time, mental health, or personal boundaries on the altar of someone else's convenience. Imagine two people rowing a boat across a river. If only one person rows, the boat spins in circles. Progress requires coordinated effort. In a similar vein, emotional labor in relationships is most effective when balanced. If you're the only one steering the ship, you risk exhaustion, frustration, and even resentment. Meanwhile, the other person rides along without expending the emotional energy that builds true investment. Over time, you grow tired of carrying the load, and the relationship deteriorates, or you remain feeling undervalued and overworked. Consider also how the Stoics approached altruism. They advocated kindness but emphasized that you must not erode your own inner equilibrium in the process. If your constant giving results in stress, anxiety, or self-neglect, you're undermining the virtue of moderation. It's easy to mistake a willingness to give anything and everything for moral goodness, but true goodness respects the health and dignity of both parties. Genuine closeness isn't solely about grand gestures. It emerges from shared responsibilities, reciprocal understanding, and mutual effort. Stepping back doesn't entail punishing the other person or severing the bond abruptly. Rather, it can be as simple as creating small pauses, wait a day or two to respond to non-urgent messages, let them plan the next outing, or encourage them to offer you emotional support when you need it. This small shift redefines your dynamic. You're not throwing away your caring nature, you're reallocating it more wisely. If they rise to the occasion, you'll have a more balanced and fulfilling relationship. If they don't, you gain clarity that the relationship was built on lopsided effort. Interestingly, withdrawing some of your habitual effort can increase your appeal. When you always make yourself fully available, you leave no room for anyone to wonder about you or contemplate what you might need in return. Humans are naturally curious. If you're perpetually on the giving end, people may unconsciously view you as a fixture rather than an equal partner. By tempering your efforts, you become less predictable, and that unpredictability can create a sense of intrigue. This isn't about manipulation, it's about restoring balance and showing that your time and energy are valuable resources, not to be given away indiscriminately. Part of the issue with overinvesting stems from a misunderstanding of what fosters lasting respect in relationships. We might believe that more will inevitably lead to better outcomes, more messages, more gifts, more demonstrations of affection. But in reality, too much one-sided effort can stifle the other person's motivation to contribute. Like a plant drowning from overwatering, the relationship fails to thrive because one side has received too much, too easily. Limiting your input creates room for natural reciprocity, allowing the other person to prove their commitment instead of passively receiving. As you begin setting boundaries around how much you give, you'll likely see who truly appreciates and supports you. People who are invested in your well-being will be energized by the chance to step up and match your effort. They'll propose plans of their own, surprise you with thoughtful gestures, or check in on you with genuine concern. Those who remain indifferent or displeased probably relied on your generosity without ever intending to give back. Over time, prioritizing a balanced exchange of energy and attention becomes second nature. This mindset shift transforms not only your personal relationships, but your broader social life as well. Colleagues, acquaintances, and even family members may start to treat you with greater respect. Acting out of self-respect encourages others to follow suit. It communicates that you value your own time and energy, which in turn signals to them that they should value it as well. Remember, the Stoic principle of moderation applies here. Overextending yourself is rarely sustainable. It depletes the emotional reserves you could channel into other meaningful pursuits, your career, your passions, or your own self-development. Overinvestment can, in fact, damage the relationship you're trying to cultivate by extinguishing the other person's drive to actively participate. By consciously distributing your emotional labor more equitably, you foster healthier dynamics that can last much longer. Ultimately, if the other party is unwilling to meet you halfway, it becomes evident where their priorities lie, and that revelation can be a catalyst for you to redirect your time and energy elsewhere. Embracing this Stoic principle of measured kindness and balanced effort positions you as someone who neither withholds affection nor drowns others in it. You become a person who offers compassion freely yet wisely, always checking to see if there's a proportional response on the other end. In doing so, you embody a confident, centered presence that inherently attracts respect and admiration. By understanding and living this equilibrium, you ensure that your relationships are built on mutual regard rather than obligation or guilt. When you stop investing too much effort, you give yourself, and others, the chance to create a connection grounded in sincerity, reciprocity, and genuine care. This balanced approach not only nurtures healthier ties, but also preserves your own sense of self-worth, a cornerstone of the Stoic life. Chapter 3. Make it clear that you don't need them. Stoicism teaches self-reliance as a core tenet, emphasizing that our well-being should not depend on factors outside our own virtue and reason. Marcus Aurelius advised reflecting on the transitory nature of external things, reminding us that much of what we cling to is fleeting. This extends to relationships. While companionship, affection, and shared experiences can be sources of great joy, basing your happiness on another person's presence or approval can lead to emotional volatility and dependency. When you show someone that you can flourish on your own, you exude a quiet confidence that is irresistibly magnetic. Why? Because independence signals emotional maturity. It says, I choose to be with you, but I am not lost without you. People are naturally drawn to those who seem to have a rich internal life, someone who doesn't crumble the moment they are left alone. In contrast, desperation often has the opposite effect, pushing people away. Humans generally recoil from the burden of someone who appears to need them for basic emotional survival. You might wonder, doesn't telling someone you don't need them come across as cold or even arrogant? Not if you approach it with genuine warmth and authenticity. Communicating that your life is full and that you're not reliant on any one person should be a statement of self-respect, not an insult. By stating, or more importantly, demonstrating, that you stand firm on your own 2 feet, you allow the other person to meet you as an equal. Equality fosters respect, and respect can blossom into deep admiration or love. However, the challenge for many is that they fear losing the other person if they don't appear devoted enough. They worry that by showing too much independence, the other person may interpret it as a lack of care. Stoicism would counsel you to detach from that fear, recognizing that the outcome is ultimately outside your control. You can't force someone to love you by clinging to them. In fact, that method usually backfires. The paradox is that when you hold on too tightly, you risk suffocating the connection. A practical method to illustrate your independence is to maintain a life full of pursuits that matter to you: hobbies, friendships, career goals, personal development. This communicates that your sense of purpose isn't solely tied to a relationship. For instance, if you've always been passionate about learning a musical instrument, commit to that. If you love volunteering, set aside consistent time for it. These personal activities not only enrich your life, but also serve as a reminder that you have a world outside of any single relationship. This also relates to self-care. Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of self-examination, knowing who you are and what you stand for. If you lack a sense of self, you might inadvertently cling to someone else's identity or schedule. By establishing clear personal goals and prioritizing your own growth, you help ensure that anyone in your life understands you are a person with direction and vision. It's not about building walls, but rather constructing healthy boundaries. Boundaries indicate that while you enjoy a person's company, there are certain lines you won't allow to be crossed, lines that protect your time, dignity, and mental health. If someone respects these boundaries, they'll find you all the more compelling. If they bristle against them, it's a sign that they were more interested in controlling you than in growing with you. Another powerful way to manifest this rule is by embracing solitude. Many people fear being alone because they associate it with loneliness or rejection. Stoics, on the other hand, viewed solitude as a vital practice. It's in solitary moments that you can reflect, cultivate inner strength, and become comfortable in your own skin. When you're at peace with solitude, you don't approach relationships from a place of "I need you to fill this void." Rather, your vibe is "I'm whole, and you can join me if you'd like." That energy shift is tangible and can dramatically alter how others perceive you. For example, imagine you're dating someone who continually tries to test your commitment by playing hot and cold games, deliberately ignoring messages, or disappearing for days. The desperate response would be to chase them, frantically seeking reassurance. The Stoic-inspired response, however, would be to acknowledge your feelings, maintain your composure, and continue living your life. You resist the urge to chase because you trust in your value. You know you're complete in yourself, whether or not they're present. This approach often triggers curiosity and admiration. They see you won't be easily manipulated, which compels them to respect you more. One might argue that modern society prizes independence to a fault, leading to disconnection. But there's a distinction between isolation, rejecting all close bonds, and independence, being capable of standing on your own. Stoicism promotes healthy interdependence. You can form meaningful bonds without losing your core identity. Such relationships become partnerships of equals rather than dynamics of dependency. Additionally, by making it clear you don't need someone, you free them from the pressure of your expectations. People sense when they're being used as emotional crutches. That weight can make them pull away. Conversely, when they realize you're not trying to siphon happiness from them, they can relax. The relationship has room to breathe, to evolve naturally, and to thrive on mutual enthusiasm rather than necessity. In the end, showing you don't need someone is a gift to both parties. You retain your sense of self, your emotional autonomy, and your ability to make rational decisions. They get to know the real you, a person who isn't just a reflection of their desires, but a whole, integrated individual. When someone falls in love with that kind of person, the bond is deeper and more authentic because it's based on genuine affection, not desperate clinginess. Therefore, to implement this rule, let your life be a testament to self-sufficiency. Cultivate your interests, goals, and social networks. Don't shy away from solitude or personal reflection. Make it clear through your actions, and, if necessary, through gentle but firm communication, that you're choosing someone's company, not clinging to them as if you'd collapse without it. In doing so, you harness the Stoic virtue of independence, which elevates your self-respect and, almost paradoxically, increases the likelihood that others will want to be a part of your life. Chapter 4. Stop being too emotionally dependent. Emotional independence is not about denying your feelings, it's about ensuring your emotions remain within your own control rather than being dictated by another person's actions or approval. Stoic philosophy encourages self-regulation, disciplining the mind to focus on what you can control, your thoughts and responses, and to release what you cannot, external events or other people's behavior. If your joy, sadness, or sense of worth hinges on whether someone texts you back, compliments you, or includes you in their plans, you surrender your emotional equilibrium to forces outside of yourself. Emotional dependence often emerges because it feels safe in the short term. For instance, if you derive your sense of self from how someone reacts to you, you might invest heavily in pleasing them. Initially, you might feel valued or cherished, but the moment their behavior changes, if they become distant, critical, or inattentive, you plunge into a state of distress. This roller coaster of emotion is precisely what the Stoics sought to avoid. Epictetus taught that what truly troubles us is not events themselves, but the judgments we hold about those events. If you believe you need someone's consistent approval to be happy, that judgment sets you up for a constant cycle of emotional highs and lows. To break free from this cycle, begin by observing your own patterns. Notice when you check your phone for messages or feel anxious if a certain person hasn't reached out. Ask yourself, why am I giving them so much power over my emotional state? Awareness is the first step toward change. Rather than denying these feelings, acknowledge them as signals that you are leaning too heavily on external validation. Stoicism offers us techniques like negative visualization, imagining the loss of certain comforts or relationships to prepare ourselves mentally for changes. While this might seem grim, the aim is to build resilience. By occasionally imagining life without a specific person's constant attention, you practice coping with that absence. This mental exercise can help you realize that you're capable of standing on your own, lessening the fear of disapproval or abandonment. Over time, you become more centered and secure, regardless of how others behave. Another element to consider is self-talk. The Stoics believed in the power of rational introspection. When you find yourself feeling unreasonably upset because you didn't get a response or someone chose different plans, calmly challenge that emotion. Remind yourself that their actions do not define your worth. You are still you, capable, interesting, valuable, regardless of their immediate behavior. This internal dialogue helps reprogram the assumption that someone else holds the key to your emotional balance. Emotionally dependent individuals often forget their own goals and desires in favor of appeasing another. If you're always pivoting your schedule to fit someone else's, suppressing your opinions to avoid conflict, or pushing aside your passions to mirror theirs, you're diminishing your individuality. But it's exactly that individuality that can make you captivating. People who know themselves, who aren't afraid to have different interests or to stand apart, emit a magnetic aura of authenticity. Instead of bending to fit someone else's mold, sculpt your own path and invite others to walk alongside you if they choose. In relationships, emotional independence can manifest as calm confidence, even during disagreements or misunderstandings. Rather than spiraling into panic or feeling worthless because of a simple conflict, you can step back and assess the situation logically. We disagree on this point. That doesn't annihilate who I am, nor does it overshadow what I bring to the table. This steadiness under pressure can be incredibly attractive. It reassures others that you won't crumble at the first sign of adversity. Of course, being emotionally self-sufficient doesn't mean you never lean on anyone or never ask for support. The Stoics valued genuine companionship and the sharing of wisdom. The difference is that you don't make your emotional well-being entirely dependent on another's responses. You share your feelings, but you don't outsource their regulation. You can accept help without relinquishing control over your sense of self. A strong approach is to regularly engage in pursuits that reinforce your sense of capability. Physical exercise, creative hobbies, and community involvement are all ways to cultivate personal strength and resilience. When you see yourself excelling in other areas, running a faster mile, mastering a new recipe, leading a community project, you internalize the message, "I am competent and I am growing." This accumulation of small victories fortifies your sense of identity outside of any relationship. It's also essential to remember that the person you're emotionally entangled with likely didn't sign up to be responsible for your entire emotional state. That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry. Many times, they may pull away simply because they feel overwhelmed or resentful of such responsibility. By reclaiming control of your emotional life, you lighten the load on the relationship, allowing affection and admiration to bloom more naturally. People often wonder how to strike the balance between showing you care and not being clingy. The Stoic principle of doing nothing in excess applies here. Show genuine concern and affection, but also demonstrate that your life doesn't come to a halt if those sentiments aren't reciprocated immediately. The subtle message is, "I value you, but I won't fall apart if we don't see eye to eye or if you're not always there." That quiet resilience can be deeply reassuring and magnetic, as it implies you're in the relationship by choice, not by desperation or need. Ultimately, ending emotional dependency doesn't happen overnight. It's an ongoing process of self-awareness, rational self-talk, and the cultivation of personal interests and strengths. Each small step you take, delaying a response until you've centered yourself, deciding to pursue your passion even if it's not shared by someone else, calmly discussing conflicts without catastrophizing, reinforces your emotional sovereignty. Over time, you'll notice that people gravitate toward your balanced energy. They'll sense you are someone who knows themselves, who isn't thrown off course by the whims of external validation. That poise is a hallmark of the Stoic spirit, and it's precisely what makes you incredibly compelling to 99% of the people you encounter. Chapter 5. Be ready to cut ties if you're treated as unimportant. One of the most challenging yet liberating Stoic lessons is recognizing when it's time to walk away from a situation or relationship that treats you as though your feelings, presence, or contributions are optional. Seneca emphasized that our primary commitment should be to living a life of virtue and dignity, and this necessarily involves respecting ourselves enough to step away from demeaning or dismissive circumstances. Allowing ourselves to be treated as an afterthought can subtly erode our sense of self, sabotaging our personal growth and weakening our resolve. It can happen so gradually that we barely notice the shift in how we see ourselves, until we wake up one day feeling drained and unsure of our own worth. Although this principle of leaving devaluing relationships might seem simple in theory, it becomes far more complicated in practice, where deep emotional ties, the fear of starting over, and long-standing habits cloud our better judgment. Yet, embracing the readiness to leave when you are consistently undervalued is one of the clearest expressions of self-respect that a Stoic mindset can foster, an active demonstration that you regard your own dignity as non-negotiable. Remaining in a place where you're repeatedly dismissed or overlooked not only amplifies someone else's disregard for you but also imprints a damaging narrative on your own mind. Day after day, you might internalize the belief that your comfort and happiness can be set aside, as though they are less important than preserving a precarious status quo. Over time, this distortion of self-worth can solidify into a grim assumption that this disappointing situation is the best you can do, or that you deserve such neglect. Perhaps the discomfort of leaving appears too daunting, or you suspect there are no better options. Yet Stoic philosophy stands firm on the notion that each of us possesses an intrinsic value, rooted in our capacity for rational thought and moral agency. We have an obligation, first to ourselves, and then to those around us, to honor that inherent worth by refusing to remain in environments that systematically undermine it. This does not imply an endless hunt for conflict or a penchant for cutting people out without good cause. Rather, It involves carefully assessing whether a situation aligns with the qualities and ethics you uphold. If it doesn't, the Stoic path would have you muster the courage to leave, even if the cost feels high at first. One of the most potent reasons people remain stuck in unhealthy relationships or detrimental situations is fear. Some fear that leaving might consign them to perpetual loneliness. Others dread the raw discomfort or potential backlash of confrontation. Still more tremble at an uncertain future, worried that stepping away from the known, no matter how bad, could lead them to an even worse fate. In line with Epictetus's teachings, many of these anxieties revolve around things we cannot fully control: someone else's reactions, the unpredictability of life after a breakup or departure, and the question of whether new connections will materialize. Genuine freedom, Stoicism tells us, arises when we focus on mastering our reactions and choices, rather than trying to manipulate external outcomes. If a person's consistent treatment of you, through disregard, boundary-breaking behavior, or emotional neglect, signals that they do not value your presence, your response should protect your self-respect. This might start with voicing your concerns, inviting change, or imposing clear boundaries. If these efforts fail or are persistently ignored, then deciding to walk away can be the most dignified course, precisely because it honors your own moral baseline and inherent worth. Interestingly, the very act of demonstrating that you're prepared to leave can, in certain cases, spur positive transformation within the relationship. If someone has grown complacent, or if they have taken your availability and support for granted, realizing they stand to lose you can be a powerful wake-up call. They may reevaluate their behavior, apologize sincerely, and attempt to make amends in tangible ways, actively listening to your needs, modifying how they communicate, and consistently proving they value you. Yet the Stoics caution us to distinguish real change from hollow promises. It's easy to utter comforting words or grand statements of contrition. Actions, however, reveal the truth. A chain of repeated letdowns and broken assurances suggests the underlying issues remain unaddressed. You can choose to forgive an honest mistake once, perhaps even multiple times, but if the person reverts to old, disrespectful patterns, it is a strong signal that genuine respect and reciprocity may never fully emerge. Clinging to wishful thinking in such scenarios usually traps you in a cycle of hope and disappointment, an emotional roller coaster the Stoics would advise you to disembark for the sake of your own stability. Confrontation often complicates the decision to leave. Many people shy away from direct discussions of hurt feelings or unmet needs, labeling such conversations as drama, or assuming that speaking openly will worsen an already tense situation. Yet Stoicism clarifies that confrontation can be a sincere effort to restore balance and safeguard personal integrity, rather than a callous attack. When someone repeatedly treats you as an afterthought, it becomes crucial to articulate your concerns calmly and plainly, specify what's bothering you, explain why it conflicts with your sense of worth, and outline what changes might remedy the situation. The other party's response is revealing. Do they respond with empathy and self-reflection, genuinely trying to see your perspective? Or do they shift blame, grow defensive, or dismiss your concerns? From a Stoic standpoint, this immediate reaction is illuminating, guiding you to recognize whether the relationship can be salvaged or if it's time to remove yourself from an environment that consistently disregards your well-being. Even if the other person pledges to do better, your duty to yourself doesn't end at accepting their promises. It becomes critical to watch for consistent action that backs up their words. Stoicism counsels balanced skepticism, advising us to respond to reality rather than to illusions. If someone claims they will treat you more respectfully, you have every reason to give them a fair opportunity to prove it, but not to the extent of burying your head in the sand if the same hurtful dynamic reappears. Changes in behavior must be observable and sustained, rather than merely temporary appeasements. Repeated patterns of neglect or contempt overshadow occasional apologies. By choosing to stand firm in your boundaries, you demonstrate compassion for yourself without adopting a cynical attitude. In effect, you're verifying whether the person truly honors your place in their life, or whether they're simply trying to maintain the status quo long enough for you to stop complaining. Ultimately, the decision to cut ties should be enacted with a sense of resolve instead of vengeance. There is a critical distinction between seeking personal justice by refusing to be treated poorly and seeking revenge. The Stoics maintain that vengeance pollutes our character, locking us in a cycle of anger that can impede emotional recovery. Walking away calmly, without bitterness, allows you to retain moral clarity. You grant yourself permission to heal without becoming ensnared by harmful emotions like rage or spite. Departure in this vein is not about punishing the other person, it's about stepping out of a dynamic that compromises your sense of integrity. In doing so, you preserve the emotional energy that would otherwise be wasted on resentment. This approach paves the way for you to close the chapter gracefully and greet future relationships without dragging along residual negativity that might sabotage new connections. Being ready to leave situations that devalue you has a remarkable ripple effect on all areas of life, including relationships that aren't necessarily problematic. When you hold firm to the standard that you won't endure persistent disrespect, you project a quiet confidence. People observe and respond to that energy, whether consciously or unconsciously. Someone who refuses to tolerate being sidelined or mistreated commands respect. You become known as a person who doesn't yield to every whim of another, who has a clear vision of how they should be treated, and who demonstrates that vision in action. Over time, this stance naturally attracts higher quality connections, those founded on mutual admiration, empathy, and reciprocity. The relationships that remain after you adopt this boundary are more likely to be constructive and deeply rooted in genuine understanding. Rather than existing as half-hearted arrangements held together by habit or convenience, they become fortifying links that help you and the other person grow. Among the most pervasive reasons people remain in disrespectful relationships is the dread of isolation. Human beings are social creatures by nature, and solitude can appear menacing or lonely. However, there is a world of difference between loneliness and chosen solitude. Existing in a relationship where you feel invisible, voiceless, or unimportant can generate a more profound sense of isolation than simply being on your own. Stoic teachings on solitude underscore its potential for personal exploration, reflection, and recalibration of one's goals. With the mental burden of chronic invalidation lifted, you're free to deepen your interests, forge new friendships, or discover passions that might have gone unnoticed while you were preoccupied with salvaging a draining connection. Paradoxically, the decision to walk away from a stifling dynamic might be the very catalyst that opens doors to healthier emotional bonds and unexpected adventures. Recognizing the moment when it's necessary to exit a relationship rather than simply reevaluate it is crucial. Everyone has rough patches, periods of stress, forgetfulness, or emotional oversight that shouldn't nullify an otherwise solid connection. We all are at times, and Stoicism advocates a measured perspective, urging us to use reason as well as empathy. A single lapse, missing an important date, or an occasional oversight in communication may not define a person's entire disposition. However, chronic patterns of disrespect, belittling remarks, or an unrelenting lack of reciprocity constitute an ongoing threat to your well-being. If time and again your instincts scream that you don't matter, and your reason affirms a repeated pattern of neglect, the need to depart becomes difficult to deny. Stoicism teaches us to heed these emotional alerts, but also to temper them with logical reflection, ensuring that decisions aren't impulsive, but are grounded in facts and consistent behaviors over time. Making the final move to cut ties can unfold in multiple ways. Sometimes you deliver a single, unambiguous statement of intent, an honest conversation that signals your imminent departure. Other times, you may opt for a more gradual approach, quietly lessening contact and emotional involvement until the relationship dissolves into a distant formality. Each scenario depends on personal circumstances, logistics, and emotional readiness. The unifying principle is that whatever method you choose should honor your self-respect and maintain a sense of fairness. Communicating your reasons for leaving doesn't guarantee they'll accept or understand them, but it does affirm your own stance. It also offers the other person a moment of clarity where they might reflect on what's transpired. Yet you're not beholden to wait around forever for them to change. Your right to exit remains your own, especially when your mental and emotional health demands it. Curiously, just knowing that you can walk away if someone continues to devalue you alters your internal landscape. You're no longer haunted by the perpetual worry that this relationship is your only option or that without it, you'll be left adrift. Instead, you gain a sense of calm empowerment. You can articulate your needs and boundaries more assertively, secure in the understanding that you have recourse beyond staying in an arrangement that saps your spirit. This quiet confidence, in many cases, shifts the dynamics of the relationship. Sometimes it prompts a newfound respect from the other person. They see you standing your ground and realize they can't keep pushing without consequences. Even if it doesn't spark a change, you're still in a position to uphold your principles, removing yourself from a corrosive situation if necessary. In the final analysis, this principle is anchored in integrity, ensuring that what you profess about your value is consistent with how you allow yourself to be treated. It's relatively easy to claim you deserve respect. It's another matter to follow through when someone persistently shows you otherwise. Stoicism, at its core, aims to close the gap between our ideals and our actions. By standing ready to leave when you're treated as insignificant or expendable, you safeguard your internal harmony. You honor the virtues you hold dear and the natural worth you carry simply by being a rational, moral agent. Doing so paves the way for you to encounter new people and fresh circumstances that nurture, rather than drain, your development. It also sends an undeniable message to others. You will not tolerate settings where you are merely tolerated, and you are committed to the cultivation of a life that celebrates, rather than diminishes, your sense of self. Practicing this consistently fortifies your bond with self-confidence and dignity. Each time you refuse to endure mistreatment, you reinforce your own moral backbone, making it easier to reject disrespect in the future. Over time, you'll likely find that this stance resonates outward, impacting how you carry yourself in professional contexts, friendships, and even casual interactions. It becomes part of your character, a calm but unwavering declaration that you are not here to be anyone's afterthought. This doesn't mean you go through life severing ties at the slightest inconvenience. Rather, you discern with care whether a given situation aligns with the high standards you set for the conduct you'll accept. When it doesn't, you give yourself permission to leave, fully aware that doing so is not an act of cruelty or selfishness, but an affirmation of self-worth. In setting that precedent, you open yourself to healthier, more rewarding connections that truly acknowledge who you are, and that, in and of itself, is a deeply Stoic endeavor. Chapter 6. Stop seeking their validation. One of the central teachings of Stoicism is to seek approval only from yourself, and by extension, from the guiding principle of virtue rather than from the shifting opinions of others. As Marcus Aurelius noted, it never ceases to amaze me, we all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. This encapsulates the paradox of validation. We crave affirmation from external sources, yet we often neglect to cultivate the self-approval that truly matters. In a world saturated with likes, comments, and instant reactions, the Stoic message is both timeless and urgent. Center yourself on what is permanent, your character and virtue, rather than on the ever-changing tides of public opinion. Validation seeking often begins innocently. We like hearing compliments, positive feedback, or praise for our achievements. Those acknowledgements can feel like signposts telling us we're on the right track. However, if your sense of worth becomes tethered to outside applause, you relinquish control of your self-esteem. At the first sign of criticism or indifference, you may feel your value plummet. The Stoics remind us to anchor our identity in our own consistent principles, not in the fluctuating sentiments of others. If you define success by living in accord with virtues like honesty, fairness, courage, and self-control, you'll remain steady whether people cheer for you or not. Praise becomes a nice bonus rather than a necessary fuel. How does this tie into making people fall in love with you or simply respect and admire you? When you radiate an aura of self-acceptance and authenticity, you become far more captivating than someone who constantly looks for external pats on the back. Confidence, grounded in genuine self-knowledge, is charismatic. People sense that you are your own person, not easily swayed by gossip or trends. That solidity in your character can be deeply appealing, as it signals emotional stability and self-awareness. It also indicates that you've done the personal work to know who you are, which can offer reassurance and intrigue to those around you. To break the cycle of seeking validation, start by questioning your motives. When you dress up for an event, is it purely for your own enjoyment? Maybe you love the color, or you appreciate the design, or are you hoping someone will comment on how good you look? When you post on social media, do you do it to share your creativity and experiences, or are you primarily chasing likes and comments to feel better about yourself? It's not wrong to enjoy compliments, but relying on them becomes an unending chase. Stoicism would ask, where are you placing your sense of self-worth? Is it within you or outside of you? This question serves as a powerful litmus test for how dependent you become on other people's opinions. A related pitfall is that validation seeking can make you susceptible to manipulation. Unscrupulous people can sense when someone needs their approval and use that weakness to control them. They might withhold compliments or selectively give attention, knowing you'll jump through hoops to earn it back. Stoics champion emotional independence precisely to avoid such vulnerabilities. Once you cease seeking validation from others, you reclaim the power over your emotional and mental state. You become the arbiter of your own value, and no one can easily push your buttons by alternating between praise and criticism. Another way to cultivate a more self-sufficient mindset is through self-reflection and journaling. Marcus Aurelius himself kept a journal, what we now know as Meditations, which was a private reflection on virtue, ethics, and his own shortcomings. By writing down your daily victories and challenges, you become the primary judge of your behavior. Instead of waiting for someone else to say, "You did great," you can look at your day and honestly assess, did I act with integrity? Did I show kindness, discipline, or courage? If yes, let that be your reward. If no, strive to do better tomorrow. In doing so, you shift the focus away from how many people noticed your efforts, placing it instead on whether or not you lived up to your own principles. When you catch yourself fishing for validation, telling a story in a way that begs for sympathy or approval, pause and ask, why do I need them to confirm my experience? This simple act of mindfulness can recalibrate your approach. Over time, you'll feel less compelled to shape your stories or behavior just to extract praise. You'll do things because they align with your values, not because you crave applause. This internal barometer can radically change how you move through social situations, freeing you from the anxiety of constantly monitoring others' reactions. Some people fear that without external validation, life becomes lonely or joyless. The Stoics would disagree. They would say true joy emerges from living in harmony with your principles, from self-improvement, and from forming connections based on mutual respect, not on perpetual reassurance. Authentic relationships naturally involve some level of positive feedback. Humans are social creatures, after all, but they don't revolve around it. In a healthy bond, each person respects the other's autonomy and inner worth. You won't be trapped in a cycle of "I do this so you'll think well of me." Instead, you interact because you genuinely want to share experiences, learn from each other, or offer mutual support. Moreover, stepping away from the need for external validation can bolster your creativity and individuality. When you stop trying to conform to what you think others expect, you free yourself to explore your unique perspectives and interests. This authenticity often makes you stand out in a crowded world. People tend to be drawn to someone who is unapologetically themselves, rather than someone who constantly shapeshifts to be liked. It's a paradox. The more you tailor yourself to external expectations, the more you blend into the background. The more you remain true to yourself, the more distinct and memorable you become. Also, think carefully about how you react to compliments when they do come your way. A Stoic approach is to receive them graciously but not to let them inflate your ego. This balanced perspective prevents you from becoming addicted to praise. If someone says, "You're really talented," you can accept the compliment with humility, perhaps using it as a sign you're on the right track, but don't let it become the sole measure of your identity. Conversely, if criticism comes your way, evaluate it rationally rather than seeing it as a personal attack. If it's constructive, use it to improve. If it's baseless, let it go. Your self-worth remains anchored in your internal compass, not in every passing comment. This shift in mindset might initially feel unsettling. We live in a society that often encourages external metrics, likes, follows, comments, to determine what's cool or successful. Most of us have been conditioned to seek the dopamine hit from a new notification or a round of applause. But if you can break away from that, you'll stand out precisely because you aren't clamoring for approval. You can become a calm center in a noisy world, someone who draws people in by simply being at peace with who they are. The sense of groundedness you project can pique others' curiosity. What makes this person so self-assured? That curiosity often leads to deeper admiration. In practical terms, one way to start disentangling yourself from validation seeking is to set small challenges. For instance, if you typically post on social media multiple times a day to gauge others' reactions, experiment with limiting yourself to posting once a week, focusing on content you genuinely value rather than what you think will garner the most likes. Or, if you usually feel compelled to share every accomplishment with friends or family in hopes of praise, try celebrating in private with a simple journal entry or a personal reward. Notice the discomfort this may cause and use Stoic principles like self-control and reflection to manage the discomfort. Additionally, pay attention to your internal dialogue during social interactions. If you find yourself anxious about whether people like you or think you're interesting, shift your focus to being present and genuinely curious about them. Ask questions, listen actively, and engage without worrying about how you're coming across. Ironically, showing authentic interest in others often creates a stronger social bond than trying to impress them. In summary, seeking constant validation places your emotional well-being at the mercy of others' opinions, a precarious position the Stoics encourage you to avoid. By instead pursuing your own development and living by your principles, you foster self-trust. This stable foundation makes you both more resilient and more magnetic. People are likely to respect and admire someone who doesn't hinge their happiness on external praise. And ironically, the less you chase validation, the more you'll find that genuine appreciation from others naturally flows your way. Remember, the Stoics never argued that you should isolate yourself from the world or become indifferent to all feedback. Rather, they taught that wisdom means discerning the source of your worth. The next time you sense the urge for someone else's applause, pause and ask, "Is what I'm doing virtuous and meaningful in its own right?" If the answer is yes, then let that be enough. By affirming your own path, you fortify your sense of identity and invite healthier, more authentic connections, ones that can blossom into real admiration or even love, because they're built on mutual respect rather than the shaky ground of external approval. Chapter 7. Don't always show how much you care. While Stoicism values sincerity, it also advocates wisdom in how we express ourselves. There's a difference between being honest and being unreservedly transparent about your every thought and feeling. Modern relationships often tout the idea that open communication is paramount, and generally, this is true. However, there is an art to pacing and discretion. If you reveal too much affection or devotion prematurely or too intensely, you risk diluting its impact or causing the other person to undervalue it. Sometimes, a well-placed gesture or a thoughtfully chosen moment to speak carries more significance than a steady overflow of declarations. Why does this happen? Psychologically, people often appreciate what they've had to work for or earn. Think about something you saved up for, a new gadget, a special piece of clothing, or a trip. The process of working toward it amplified its value. The same principle can apply to emotional exchanges. If you shower someone with unrestrained affection without giving them time to reciprocate or even to decide if they want to invest equally, it can overwhelm them or make them complacent. They may feel they've received your devotion for free, thus seeing it as less of a precious gift and more like a given. It's not that your feelings become worthless, but rather that their appreciation can dull in the absence of balanced reciprocity. Stoic philosophy encourages temperance, a measured, deliberate approach to life that extends to how we handle our affections. You don't withhold affection to manipulate, you do it to maintain balance and authenticity. Genuine love or care isn't proven by how constantly you broadcast it. Sometimes, an understated action or a thoughtful gesture at the right time speaks volumes more than extravagant displays offered daily. This measured approach also preserves a sense of mystery, which can be compelling. Humans are inherently curious. If you expose every card in your hand, there's little left to discover, and the allure of learning more about you can dissipate. A key Stoic insight is that self-restraint can enhance the depth of any relationship by letting it unfold naturally. Now, does this mean you play games or keep people guessing with the intent to manipulate? Not from a Stoic standpoint. It's more about allowing space for organic growth in the relationship. Instead of sending texts every hour, maybe you send a thoughtful check-in after a productive day, showing that while you care, you also have a life of your own. This signals respect for your own time and theirs. Such boundaries not only protect your emotional well-being, but also lend an air of confidence to your demeanor. When people sense you're self-possessed and not desperate for their constant validation, they often respond with greater respect and genuine interest. If you're accustomed to wearing your heart on your sleeve, scaling back can feel unnatural at first. You might worry that the other person will think you've lost interest or that you're withholding affection. But the Stoic perspective would remind you that true interest is consistent yet moderate. Over-eagerness can raise questions about why you're so quick to become attached. Are you looking for validation or filling an emotional void? By taking a step back, you demonstrate security in yourself, suggesting you aren't frantic to secure someone's affection. This subtle change in your behavior can be a strong signal that you value your own emotional space as much as you value theirs. Another reason not to always show how much you care is the element of timing. In many cases, relationships develop in stages. Early on, it might be wise to tread softly, learning about each other gradually, rather than pouring out your life story and deepest emotions immediately. This measured reveal helps you gauge compatibility. If you realize that the other person can't meet you halfway in emotional depth, you can adjust your own investment accordingly before entangling yourself too deeply. Observing how they respond to smaller gestures can reveal a great deal about their willingness to nurture the connection. From a Stoic lens, emotional restraint is a form of discipline. It's a way of acknowledging that not every impulse or urge to declare your feelings should be acted upon, especially if doing so could compromise your long-term well-being or the health of the relationship. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about mastering one's impulses, understanding that while we may have genuine emotions, we also have reason to guide their expression. This reason should prompt us to ask, is now the right time to share this? Is my expression proportionate to the stage of our connection? Pausing to reflect ensures you don't inadvertently overpower the other person's sense of emotional safety. Beyond romantic relationships, This principle applies to friendships and even professional settings. Oversharing personal struggles or constantly emphasizing how much you value someone's presence can paradoxically push them away or make them uncomfortable. A steady, calm demonstration of respect and camaraderie often outperforms grand declarations. People feel more relaxed and trusting when they sense you're not reliant on their constant acknowledgement of your feelings. By focusing on subtle, genuine interactions, you make room for natural rapport to develop instead of forcing intimacy. Does this mean you never open up fully? Of course not. Once a relationship has matured and trust is established, deeper expressions of care become a natural extension of that trust. The difference is that these expressions are then built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. They're not used as currency or a means to bind a person to you. They emerge naturally, in a context where both parties have shown they can handle vulnerability responsibly. In that environment, opening up fosters a deeper connection instead of overwhelming the other person. One practical way to implement this rule is to observe the other person's willingness to invest emotionally. Let them initiate conversation sometimes. Let them make the first move or plan a date. If they do, it signals they value you enough to take those steps. You can reciprocate in kind, building a rhythm where both of you contribute. Notice how they respond to a moderate expression of care. If they seem delighted and reciprocate, you can gradually show more affection. If they withdraw or behave indifferently, it's a sign that dumping even more affection on them won't fix the imbalance. It may actually worsen it by increasing their emotional distance. A crucial aspect here is self-awareness. If you find yourself constantly battling the urge to overshare or to prove your devotion, ask what emotional need drives that urge. Are you seeking approval, afraid of abandonment, or trying to fast forward the closeness you crave? Stoicism advocates introspection, encouraging you to understand your deeper motivations rather than simply reacting to them. Once you identify the root cause, you can address it more effectively, possibly realizing it's something you can fulfill internally rather than demanding it from someone else. This self-knowledge arms you with the ability to pause, reflect, and then decide whether sharing more of yourself in a particular moment is wise or premature. Finally, preserving a bit of mystery and restraint can spark a sense of intrigue. When people sense there's more depth to discover, they naturally want to learn more. This curiosity fuels attraction and sustained interest. It's the emotional equivalent of pacing yourself in a good story. You don't reveal the entire plot in the opening chapter. You hint, build tension, and allow the narrative to unfold, keeping the audience engaged. In much the same way, allowing your feelings to unfold gradually gives the relationship room to breathe, grow, and deepen without turning it into a rushed emotional sprint. In sum, not always showing how much you care is about balance, not deception. You keep your emotional cards closer to your chest, allowing genuine connection to unfold at a pace that fosters respect and understanding. This aligns with the Stoic commitment to self-control and rational action. When you are measured in your displays of affection, you communicate self-respect, avoid overwhelming the other person, and let them choose to explore the depth of your bond at a natural pace. It's precisely this blend of authenticity and restraint that makes you both intriguing and reassuring, a combination that draws people in and keeps them wanting to learn more about you. Remember, the Stoic goal isn't to shut down your emotions or play aloof. It's to express your care in ways that are proportionate and considerate of the situation. By doing so, you maintain your own sense of equilibrium and invite others to do the same. The end result is a relationship, be it romantic, platonic, or professional, built on mutual respect, genuine curiosity, and the comfort of knowing that each party values the other without demanding constant proof of devotion. This respectful, balanced stance ultimately fosters deeper admiration, trust, and a long-lasting bond that doesn't wither under the weight of unrealistic expectations. Remember, each of these 7 rules, rooted in the enduring wisdom of Stoicism, helps you cultivate a sense of self-respect and emotional stability. By integrating them into your life, you become someone others naturally gravitate toward. If you found value in this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your experiences or questions in the comments below. Each step you take toward self-mastery brings you closer to the kind of magnetic presence that 99% of people find utterly compelling.